Hey, good evening, everyone. We'll give it another minute for people to log in and then we'll get started. All right, I think we can get started. So welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to be giving an information session followed by a Q&A on SOGI inclusive education. We have with us today Scout Gray, who is the BC provincial lead for SOGI 123, and Susan Harmon, who is a retired educator from the Vancouver School District and also a longtime volunteer with PFLAG Vancouver. And Mark Sawyer is with us as well as somebody who may be able to answer some questions after the information session. And we have Kate Turner helping us with tech support. I will just say that we are very honored to live, learn, play, and work on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish Nation and the Sheshault Nation. And I think it's important also that we note the devastating and painful, though unsurprising news out of Tecumlip's residential school this week. Part of the healing is in the work that we do with Truth and Reconciliation, bringing these stories to light, committing to learning and moving forward in equitable, caring, and respectful ways, and acknowledging the harms. And we would be remiss also not to note how colonization has affected SOGI in terms of how it intersects with Indigenous identities. And here too, we're working on healing through partnerships with our Indigenous education partners. So thank you for being here. And I'll let Kate just explain how the webinar works, and then we will get started.
Thanks, Vanessa. Good evening, everyone. I just would like to let everyone know that the session will be recorded. We had about 50 people who registered for the session, and some will be unable to join. So we will record and be able to share with those who are unable to attend. If you have any questions or comments throughout the session, we would encourage you to type them in the Q&A. You'll find it on the bottom bar of your Zoom box. And we'll do our best to answer your questions or direct them to the most appropriate panelists for the answers. And that is all from me. Thank you.
And just to note that if we don't have time to get to all the questions tonight, that we can follow up with you if you want to reach out, or we will try to take note of the questions we don't have time for as well and reach out back to you, as we do have your contact information from the registration. So thanks very much. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Susan Harmon, who's going to start us off tonight. Oh, I'll start here. You can tell me when you want to switch the slide.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you. Why don't you move me on to my next slide right now, please?
Okay.
Hi. As Vanessa said, I was an elementary school teacher and teacher librarian in Vancouver. She was kind enough not to say that it was for 31 years. I've been retired for a while now. But I have stayed in touch with what's happening with SOGI, mostly because before I retired, my younger son came out as gay, and that's 18 years ago now. And it was the end of grade 12, and I was startled and shocked, but not terribly unhappy about it, because he had seemed like a social isolate. And I kind of thought that he'd be better once he knew his authentic self. And but I wanted to talk to other parents, and I searched around for a group. And it took a little while, but I finally found there was a newspaper article about a mother and her adult son, and the mother was going to PFLAG. So I have been a volunteer with PFLAG ever since, 17 years. At times I was the president. Now I'm just on the board. So PFLAG, we like to step away from the acronym a little bit because it stands for Parents, Family, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. Because PFLAG came to be first in the United States and back in the time of Stonewall. So I think that was in the 70s. We didn't really know about transgender things then. So now we say we're PFLAG, Parents, Family, and Friends of Lesbian, Gay, Transgender people. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can see the website here and the email address and the phone number. You can also go on our website and fill out the contact us form on our website. So right now, of course, we're meeting by Zoom for, since COVID started. But before that, we met in person, and we will probably go back to meeting in person, which is we're the Vancouver chapter. So that would be at the Roundhouse Community Center in downtown Vancouver. And we searched for a home. We tried different places, and we've stuck with the Roundhouse because it's right next to the Canada Line subway station, and it has parking underneath, so it's easy to park there. And we meet once a month. Talk about that in a minute. But just a last chance to write down any of this information that you would like. There are chapters around, it started in the United States. A mother in the 70s in New York had a gay son, he was adult. And when I think it was the first Pride Parade started, she actually marched in the Pride Parade with a sign that talked about, "I love my gay son." And that was pretty remarkable at that time. That was one of the first times that we know of that a mother did that. And so PFLAG was born. And opinions vary about when our chapter started. I think it had a different name for a while, but approximately 1990 in Vancouver, which makes us the second oldest chapter in the country, I think possibly. Toronto's a much bigger chapter and they might be the first, but I don't know that for sure. So Vanessa, if you would move to the next slide, please. This is our mission statement. We provide support for all family members and friends. We work to create an environment of understanding so our gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender children can live with dignity and respect. And parents tend to come to us to meet other parents who are in the same situation. We have people on our board who are quite knowledgeable. I'm only knowledgeable by virtue of the fact that I've been listening to people for the last 17 years in the meetings. But we always have we almost always have somebody trans there from our board, because that's where all the questions come from. When I started 17 years ago, parents only came about gay and lesbian children, but now they virtually only come about trans children. It's so much so that we have a statement at the beginning and we say, you might think you're at the wrong meeting, and that's if somebody should ever turn up with a gay or lesbian child, they are at the right meeting, even though they might only hear things about trans for the first little bit. Okay, Vanessa, I think I'm ready. Our meetings. Before COVID, we met on the third Wednesday of each month at 7 o'clock, and we try to wrap up by 8:30 or 9 at the Roundhouse Community Center. And now we meet at the same time, but on Zoom. If you want to attend, you can register on our website, which was pflagvancouver.com. I also want to say that we sort of gave birth to the PFLAG Surrey chapter. Somebody from our group went down there and started their chapter. And so they meet the second Wednesday of every month on Zoom, and we meet the third Wednesday of every month. So this is a unique time to tune into one of those or both of those meetings, because someday we're going to go back to being in person. And here on the Sunshine Coast, you're quite a long way from Vancouver. So this is an ideal opportunity to check out the meetings and see what you think. I guess we've got the Surrey meeting coming up next week, and then we'll be the week after. I can't remember if we have any more slides, Vanessa. Can you check it out for me? Otherwise, I do have a few more things I want. No? Okay. I have a few more things before I turn it over. I retired some years ago, 14 years ago, from my school. But before I retired, I was doing a lot of SOGI type work. This Vancouver School Board was doing a lot of LGBT work. They had a consultant, one teacher who that was his job or her job, to work at the school board and go out and sometimes help kids who were transitioning at the high school level. And there was I was the PFLAG rep for some years on an LGBT committee at the Vancouver School Board. I was the librarian during that time at the school, and the school board sent out books, this kind of book, which I might talk about again later. So I was collecting them in the library and making sure that people use them. And we were really trying to, throughout the whole school, trying to do a lot of work with embedding things in the curriculum, and then now SOGI is quite new. It's the 4th year, and I haven't been working during that time, but I think it's a lot of the same kind of work I was doing that time. So I'll probably have more to say, but I'll stop now. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks very much, Susan. And now we have Scout, who is the BC provincial lead for SOGI 123, and probably has more to say about that introduction.
Yeah,
welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and hi, everyone. Yeah, as Vanessa said, I'm the SOGI lead for BC. I use they and them pronouns, and I'm calling in from Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, and Stolo Land, just outside of Vancouver. And yeah, so as the BC lead, my job is to connect with and support all 60 of the public school districts, plus a growing number of independent and First Nations schools that are connected and working towards being more SOGI inclusive. So that is my job, to really work across the whole province in this. Next slide, please. So before we go in deeper, I just want to pause to talk a little bit about language. If you don't know, that the SOGI that we're saying all the time does stand for sexual orientation and gender identity. And we really choose this language intentionally. So the other acronym, 2S LGBTQ, or you may have just heard shorter versions of that, LGBT or LGBTQ, is certainly a big part of this work, working to support Two-Spirit, lesbian, gay, bi, trans. Oh, I forgot to write trans, and I wrote that out. Apologies. And queer. So that is an acronym that is used as well. And absolutely, this work that we do is supportive of students or their families that identify within some of those words. But it's not just for them. It really is for all students. All students have a sexual orientation and gender identity, and that really is important to us and important that the work of SOGI inclusive education benefits all students. Next up. So I'll share a little bit of the history of SOGI 123. So as Susan said, this work is pretty new. We've been around for about 5 years as an organization. I work for the ARC Foundation, which is a nonprofit. And schools, districts were already starting to do work. And in about the early 2010s, some of the districts started writing, for example, anti-homophobia policies or doing other work explicitly in this area. So Vancouver, certainly, like Susan mentioned, but Burnaby and Nanaimo, a few other districts were really leaders in this work and started doing some of it. And then in 2015, ARC started talking more with educators, and we started a pilot project just in one district in Delta where we looked at what would it be like if we supported there to be a SOGI district lead. So one person in the district that just had a small amount of their time dedicated towards making sure that the school, that the district in general was working towards being more SOGI inclusive. So working with the Delta School District was really successful. So the next year in 2016, we piloted the program with 9 districts. So we added Squamish and Kamloops and a number of others, a greater region across BC. And that same year, gender identity and expression was added to the Human Rights Code. So we were kind of in the right place at the right time where we were, as a nonprofit, starting to see what we could do to support districts in being more SOGI inclusive. And that year, when the Human Rights Code changed, there was a requirement for the schools and the districts to update their policies and to start adding that language to reflect the Human Rights Code. So that's really kind of when this project really took off. And the next year, 2017, we had grown from those 9 pilot districts to almost all 60 districts across the whole province. So next, why is SOGI 123 important, and why is SOGI inclusive education important? So this phrase is really important to me, that SOGI inclusive education provides a mirror for some students and families to see themselves reflected, and a window for all students to see the diversity that exists in society. So again, this connects back to that this work is important, very vital for LGBTQ kids who sometimes don't see themselves reflected in the schools. I've heard students talk about how what is taught and what they get out of school is not just what is being said, but also what is not being said. And if we're ignoring this huge topic, a huge part of a student's life, then they may really struggle to connect with school. But that also, this reminds us that SOGI inclusive education benefits all students, that window for all students to see the diversity is really critical. And most kids have someone in their life, whether that's their parents or community or aunts and uncles, someone who may be in that LGBTQ group. And so they also need to see their broader community reflected. And we know we've seen research that really shows that a SOGI inclusive school benefits all students, that mental health outcomes are better for all students when schools are more inclusive. So the next, what is SOGI 123? So each of those numbers stands for something. So SOGI 1 is the policies and procedures, and that's really where we got started, where the work began. Like I said, when the Human Rights Code changed, there was a requirement that all districts reflect that gender identity and expression be added to codes of conduct, anti-bullying statements, that kind of thing. But a lot of districts wanted to go further and not just have gender identity, on the long list of things that we are not allowed to discriminate against. That's important, but a lot of districts wanted to state not just that students will be protected, but how, how are we actually going to do this well? And that's where we came in to try to provide that support. SOGI 2 is environments, physical environments. So that can be anything from posters and images on the walls. So yes, maybe rainbow flags, but also, just showing diverse families in space around them, as well as, environment also includes stuff like bathrooms, and it can include events. So it's June 1st today, it's Pride Month. So being able to honor and recognize events like that is all part of SOGI 2 environments. And then SOGI 3 is resources. So we provide a ton of resources to make sure that school staff have what they need to be able to support their students, because that's something we hear so often from educators, that they really want to support all their students and make sure all their students feel safe and included at school. But when it comes to SOGI, sometimes they just don't know how or what to do. So these, there are resources available to those teachers, but also there's resources available to parents and other community groups that we can get more into, as well as when towards the end of the presentation. And then finally, yeah, next slide. That was right, Vanessa. How does SOGI 1, 2, 3 work? So we love sticking to these three. So there's three main ways that we do the work. One is provincial alignment. So making sure that this work, because it can still be certainly like a hot button topic, and that really it's a provincial initiative. We're funded and supported by the Ministry of Education. All 60 school districts are engaged in this work. And the more we're doing this all together, the rising tide, the more things can really change and be better for students, no matter where they're going to school. SOGI 2 is networks. So we make sure that educators who are looking for support and resources and people to talk to can have access to a network of educators that are supportive and inclusive, so they can work together and not just sort of in their own separate silos doing this work. And then 3, again, is resources, making sure that resources are accessible and available. People know where to go to find what they need when they are hoping to make changes. Again, for schools, for staff, for educators, but also for parents and community members as well. So I think that's my intro to SOGI 1, 2, 3, kind of at the provincial level. And now I will pass it back over to you, Vanessa, to talk about specifically in your district.
Thanks very much, Scout. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what this looks like here on the Sunshine Coast, and what we're doing to put SOGI 1, 2, 3 into action here. So firstly, why is SOGI 1, 2, 3 important to us here? So for lots of the reasons that Scout has already mentioned and Susan has already mentioned, we know how much of a difference it makes to students because they tell us. When we're in schools every day, we have kids that come up and tell us how much it means to them to feel safe at school, to feel accepted. And I've heard that story from students myself, but I've also heard it from our SOGI leads that are across the district in different schools. There have been some pretty public examples this year at Cedar Grove. I know there are some parents here from there, and it has been really beautiful to see some of the allyship that's happened in that school and the support from the community for those kids or that student there. And we also get to see how students blossom once they're accepted. We see, and I think many of my colleagues can attest to this, we see kids kind of hiding in their hoodies and just sort of isolated. As Susan was talking about her son, I see that, and then I see what happens when kids know that they're accepted and that it's okay to be who they are, and they just sort of, the hoods come off and they just glow with pride, and that isn't possible without the real support of the school community around them. We also, this work is important to us because 17% of our region's kids don't identify as straight, and 3% of our region's kids, and when I say region, I mean North Shore, Coast, and Garibaldi. So that's based on the McCreary Adolescent Health Survey. So 3% identify as transgender or non-binary. So that's a significant proportion of our students. And so we want to make sure that everyone feels included. And as Scout mentioned, we know there's better outcomes for kids when we're doing SOGI inclusive education, just as there's better outcomes when we include all elements of diversity in our curriculum. Mental health is a really big part of our why, and it's a personal part of my why as a school counselor. Because non-binary youth report more than 50% higher levels of stress and unhappiness than their cisgender peers, because they're 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, and because school connectedness and adult relationships, accepting relationships, are protective factors. That kids who have that school connectedness and those relationships are 2 and 3 times more likely to report good and excellent mental health. So we know, we have data, and we know that's a really important piece. And so that's part of why it's so important to us here in SD 46. And how we've laid it out here is we have a policy, which is called a regulation, which I'll show you a little bit of in a moment. And then we also have a SOGI district committee. So that is a committee that is chaired by myself, but also on that committee, we have our director of instruction for inclusive education. We have a secondary principal rep who is Mark Sawyer, and he will join us later. We have an elementary principal rep, we have a secondary teacher rep, an elementary teacher rep, we have a QP support staff representative, a parent representative, and 2 student representatives now. And so we meet about 4 times a year to talk about what's happening across the district and what initiatives we want to bring forward. We also have SOGI leads in every school, and sometimes that's more than 1, sometimes that's 2 or 3 as a team, working on SOGI inclusive education and sharing resources and information with school staffs. We also have school resource kits. So this connects really well with what Scout was saying about the SOGI 1, 2, 3. So we have a kit in every school that has a number of books and resources, posters, stickers, and we update that every year. And so there are resources for teachers to use in their classrooms. And oftentimes, a lot of our SOGI leads are actually teacher librarians. And so they often duplicate the resources that we have in our kits so that they're available for teachers and students as well. We have in a number of our schools gender and sexuality alliances and SOGI clubs where kids can explore both a safe place to talk about SOGI issues and also just a place where they can be allies and stand up for diversity and inclusion in their schools. We also offer professional development for staff every year and student presentations where we bring in people to speak with students. And we're also taking a foray into parent engagement. So this is the first one that I've been a part of. I'm not sure if there was one previous to my position as lead, but we're very happy to bring parents on board. And we hope this is just the first of the parent sessions that we can offer. So our SOGI regulation is about a 2-page document, and you can find that on our website. But this, I just thought I would share with you the rationale. And I just have to move. I can't see my little pictures hiding part of the slide here. School District 46 provides an environment for all members of the school community to work and learn free from discrimination and harassment while promoting proactive strategies and guidelines to ensure that all students, employees, and families are welcomed and included in all aspects of education and school life and are treated with respect and dignity. So that's the rationale. And then if you want to see more about the regulation, you can go through and see the specifics. And then I thought I'd share with you some examples of what SOGI might look like in various classrooms. Now, these photos are not from our district, but they are examples of what integrated SOGI education can look like. So in a kindergarten and grade 1 classroom, similar to the book that Susan held up earlier, it's usually centered around different types of families or how the color pink can belong to anyone and that anyone can read, anyone can wear pink and that people should wear what makes them feel comfortable and happy, and that the most important thing is to be kind. And really trying to dispel the idea of that there are girl and boy colors. I know this lesson was taught in my son's class this year. He's in a K1 class. And then in a grade 4-5 class, we might have a timeline of perspectives on inequalities in Canadian history. And there might be some historical events that are part of that timeline where different groups of people were discriminated against. For example, the Indian Act for Trade, building of the CPR Railway, Japanese internment, anti-Asian riots, residential schools, and the treatment of members of the LGBTQ community. So that would be an integrated way to look at injustice over time. And then in secondary classrooms, these are just some of the examples, but what could happen or what could be explored in physical and health education 9 would be looking at strategies for responding to discrimination, stereotyping, and bullying. So what you're seeing here is brainstorming looks like around the stereotypes about boys and girls and how they're allowed to express those. And then as part of that lesson, they would also be proposing strategies to promote health and well-being of the school community and mental health. And so how to respond to some of that and be one's authentic self. And then in the English language arts from grades 8 to 12, there could be a critical inquiry unit on exploring identity through personal, social, and cultural contexts, values, and perspectives in text, so that you can use a real wide variety of texts, and students can kind of look at the influence of family, friends, activities, education, religion, gender, age, place, settlement patterns, immigration, economic factors, political events, local and beyond, to recognize that authors write from a particular perspective and that they write in a particular context. So LGBTQ or SOGI stories are included in that, but they are not they're just part of an integrated curriculum that is inclusive of diversity. Hopefully that makes sense. And then we wanted to share some resources. So I will defer back to Scout, and I think the three of us will all share a little bit of some of the resources that we can offer.
I can jump in. So yeah, this image here is from a parent's pamphlet that we have available on our site, which just covers some of the intro to what is SOGI 123. So if you want to learn more, our website is there, sogieducation.org is the whole site, and /parents is the page that has resources specifically for parents. One of the resources we have on there is if you're someone who wants to continue this conversation, maybe with your PAC or in more detail, there's resources on our site as well for you to just help lead conversations and presentations. So there's things you can grab and take and make your own, but a lot of the basis are already there. There's also some videos. So again, if you want to learn a little bit more about what SOGI 123 looks like in schools, there's one for elementary and one for secondary. Those are great places to go to learn a little bit more about the programming and what it can look like in schools and districts.
Great, thanks, Scout. And I also just wanted to mention in our community where you might find support. So besides contacting the school district or myself or your school lead, if you have a student in a particular school, you can contact the school lead or principal. But also we are lucky to have a gender diverse drop-in that meets monthly, and I think that's right now on Zoom, but then it will resume in person, and that's for youth. So if you're a parent of a youth that might want to be part of a gender diverse drop-in, then you would contact Shane, and I believe the next meeting is June 10th. We're also lucky to have 2 healthcare practitioners here on the coast with specialized training in transgender issues. So that is Annalise Hassler, our nurse practitioner, and Dr. Carmen Guja, who works out of Cowrie Medical. And I know Dr. Guja will prioritize anyone who's identifying as transgender or non-binary. And I think Susan was also going to talk about Transcare BC, but it's one of the resources we use the most in terms of directing families who may have students who are gender diverse or looking for resources around and questions around gender.
I wasn't
identity.
going to say anything more about TransCare BC, except that we recommend it to people all the time at our PFLAG chapters. If they have a trans child or relative, then you can see, I've got on the list the PFLAG Vancouver chapter and the PFLAG Surrey chapter. And I haven't mentioned yet that we have an umbrella organization called PFLAG Canada. And whereas our Vancouver chapter is pflagvancouver.com, PFLAG Canada is pflagcanada.ca. And we in Vancouver have a resource list on our website, and PFLAG Canada has a resource list on their website. And I just happen to own this book that I see this gets recommended quite a bit. It's everything you ever wanted to know about trans, but we're afraid to ask. And I bought my own copy because I figured I needed to know more. So that's by Bryn Tannehill. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So our final thoughts before we get to the question period are, we're just going to end with this joint statement that comes from the Minister of Education, or the former Minister of Education, Rob Fleming, the BC Teachers Federation, Superintendents Association, School Trustees Association, Principals and Vice Principals Association, Association of School Business Officials, the Federation of Independent School Associations, and the BC Confederation of Parent Advisory Councils. And that joint statement reads, "We believe that all schools in our province, public and independent, must be spaces that are safe, acceptable, respectful, and welcoming for all students, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, race, religion, or background. There is no room for discrimination in BC schools. As provincial education partners, we are unified in this commitment. It is important that we all stand up together and together to support inclusive learning environments. Our goal as teachers, administrators, support staff, trustees, and parents is to create learning environments where all students can thrive and live authentic lives." So with that, I thank you all for being here. And if you have questions that you would like to put into the chat, we will do our best to answer. And I will just stop the sharing. You can see us a little bigger.
It's quiet out there. So just once again, you can put your question in the Q&A. You'll find it along the bottom bar. You can ask the question anonymously, or you can have your name behind it. And we may type an answer in, or we may ask your question and direct it to the appropriate panelists.
I see that we just have a nice thank you. That was very informative. Thanks, Suzanne. And I see that there's a question. If we want to become more involved, we just contact our school principal. We're at Cedar Grove. Yes, so you can definitely do that if you want to be involved at the school level. Contact the principal. You can find out who the SOGI lead is in your school as well, through the principal, and you can certainly help and plan events and help get parents informed and part of the conversation. And hopefully that answers your question. And we have another question about, will parents be given info on specifics on what's covered in class so we can assist in dialogue at home? So I don't know if maybe Scout, you might want to take this. I can answer from a district perspective, and maybe Mark has something to say about that too.
Yeah, I can start and you can fill into what I missed. So my understanding is that yes and no. I think that it's hard to always know, right, in advance what's always going to come up. That a lot of educators do kind of go with, if a student asks a question, then they're going to maybe answer if it's relevant to the class in that time. So I know that educators do a lot, especially at the elementary school level, to communicate home as much as possible, while knowing that sometimes things come up in an unplanned way. So there isn't always that ability to communicate at every point. And talking about SOGI is not something that requires a heads up to schools, home to parents, because of that, because it is something that is a part of the Human Rights Code, and that's integrated into it could be integrated into any little bit of the day. So it's not always something that can be sent home, but I know a lot of schools work to make sure that the parents are connected to what's happening in their schools. Do you want to add anything, Vanessa?
Or Mark, did you want to add anything for the secondary level? And then I'll.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Scarlett. I think you covered it. I think a lot of things happen ad hoc, and in high school especially, a lot of organic conversations tend to arise in classrooms. We follow sort of a strict set of core values in our school that everything is always respectful and there's empathy, and when we have discussions with each other, we've seen that just recently this year, how sharing of information and dialogue and communication can really help a school environment in being inclusive. There's evidence happening every day, and it's wonderful to see all the time. So, but it's not necessarily, as Scale points out, something that we feel the necessity to broadcast that these conversations are happening.
And I would just add that if you're interested in supporting those conversations at home, then I think you could ask your child's teacher just if they have any resources, and they can, of course, connect with the school lead, or the principal is also a good resource for that. And the other option would be to reach out to us at the district level if you would like specific parent resources around having these conversations with primary age students or intermediate age students and that kind of thing, because that's something that our district committee is always working on creating and with our school leads. And so we'd be happy to try to assist with that.
I'd
Yeah,
like to
Susan.
say something too.
Yeah.
I know with SOGI, the word I've heard, which I haven't heard tonight, is embedded. It's embedded in the curriculum. And that means it might just, I was a primary teacher for many years, and for the last some of those years, I had books like this in my classroom, and I've held this one up before. I'll just explain that All About You has been on the curriculum in kindergarten and grade 1, since time began. And so this is the family book, and it's meant to be used, and I'm not going to read all of it to you, but it's just talking about different kinds of families, because it's going for diversity. So some families are big and some families are small. And then there are all different kinds of families. Some families are the same color and some are different color. So that's one of the values that's embedded in the curriculum as well. But all families like to hug each other. So one kind of family, I've got it here. Some families have 2 moms or 2 dads. That's the only reference in the whole book to this, but that's the important part, is it's embedded in this book and it's embedded in the curriculum as well. And that might just come up, but a teacher can't write home and say, we talked about how some families have 2 moms or 2 dads today, because it happened in 2 minutes. Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that was read in a kindergarten class in the school where my partner is a principal. And there was a little kid in that kindergarten class who was like, oh, my friend Callan has 2 moms. He has 2 moms. My friend Callan, he has 2 moms. And one of them is the principal. It was the cutest thing. Anyway, I wasn't there, but I love the story. Anyway, hopefully that answers it. I'm just going to read out, I have a non-binary son who has been so accepted and supported. I am so grateful for everything you're all doing. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Somebody else who says, great presentation. Thank you, James. And now we have a question. What if people say things like, hey, is your kid gay? They don't seem gay, but your child has not come out to you. I don't feel that I should confront my child about this. Is that the right thing to do? Scout?
Sure. So one thing I learned, we worked on a project where we had some focus groups with youth about what ways that LGBTQ youth wish that their families and their parents could be more supportive, or ways that they already were being supportive, so we could use that to support other families. And one thing that really came up consistently is that youth are really good at listening between the lines, that they, LGBTQ youth would listen for what parents are saying. And so that's coming from youth. What I would say is maybe you could drop hints without being direct. Like you said, for some kids that might work, for some kids it might work for them. If you said, hey, are you this thing? Maybe they'll feel relieved and be like, yes, I am. Or maybe they'll be like, no, why did you ask? And it'll be fine. But for some kids, it's true that they would not like that question being asked directly, and want, if they are gay or something, that they want to just be able to tell you in their own time. So if you want to create that space where your kids will feel comfortable to tell you what is going on, just drop hints, make it clear that you will, accept them, that you are accepting of different sexual orientations and gender identities without being totally direct, so that they will feel confident and comfortable to share what's going on if something is going on for them.
That's great. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add to that? Okay. Miyuki says, very good to see SD46 SOGI regulation rationale and provincial joint statement as foundation of why SOGI is introduced in schools. Thank you. Thank you, Miyuki, and thank you for being one of our awesome school leads. And we have a question from Joanna. Do kids feel confident enough to go to a SOGI group at their schools? So I'm not sure if I can speak for all schools, but generally these groups are started due to student interest. So it isn't something that the adults say, hey, let's do this. Adults might ask kids if they want it, but it is generally supposed to be student initiated and student led, and then the adults are there to support. And so I think, at least in the schools that I'm aware of, it will depend on the student. And I think it also depends on the energy that might be behind that group. So if the group is a really small group that sort of meets quietly in the counselor's office, well, then that maybe people wouldn't be confident enough. But if the group is active and planning events and has some momentum behind it, then it might be easier for kids to attend. I'm not sure about you, Mark, if you have something to add to that. You have a very active SAGA group at Chatledge.
No, thanks, Vanessa. We do. It's and we've had it for a number of years. And I think the most important thing is just the creation of a space where students know that exist and they can go and feel safe and share, and it's open to everyone. I mean, that's the most important thing. I pop in quite regularly just to say hello to the meeting times for our SAGA group. And it creates great dialogue, and kids know that it's supported from not only the teachers that are there, but the administrators that are in the building. And that's really important. I showed up with my rainbow mask the other day, and the kids were really excited. And again, for me, it's not just about wearing it, it's the meaning behind wearing it too, that I am an ally and support the kids in our building. And I know that was something I just saw later. There's a comment just regarding students. I'm jumping ahead here, I apologize, but these spaces are sort of advertised even in our announcements, so kids know that they are there. And we do have things like stickers on doors to know that we are an inclusive environment and we are a safe environment in our schools. Hopefully that answered that.
Anyone else have anything they want to add about that? I don't think anyone else is in schools, so they.
No, I have heard from lots of schools that it seemed like it used to be that students wouldn't feel confident coming out to the SOGI club or group until they were older. So mostly they were just in high schools. And so it was like mostly grade 10, 11, 12 students who felt confident. And that a lot of what I'm hearing is a lot of educators are noticing that younger students are feeling confident to go, like, you know, first year in high school, feeling confident to go. And that a lot of educators are telling me that that is to them a sign that this is working and that they're doing a good job of creating more inclusive schools. Because great, you know, first year in high school is an intimidating thing, right? And if the school is creating that safe space where kids feel confident to join a club, then something is going well.
It's true. One of our student representatives is in grade 9 on our district committee, and we had originally thought it would be, you know, grades 10, 11 students that would apply. So yeah, that is very true. Susan says the information is very encouraging to see how broad things are covered through all the grades. Very good to see these details. Thanks. Thanks, Susan. Tanya Hall tells us that Blue's Clues just released a great music video for Pride Month. It is great. Oh, awesome. I can't wait to check it out. Okay. It says the books and stories are wonderful to give examples to kids of diverse families. I'm curious to know how pronouns will be introduced to primary children. I think this is probably in reference to one of the lesson plans that's on SOGI 123. I'm not sure if you can speak to that, Scout.
Yeah, I'm not sure which lesson plan necessarily. I think about with pronouns in general. I've actually talked to a few speech pathologists in schools that have told me that often with primary students, they do a lot of work around pronouns. Just because kids, younger kids don't always get pronouns right. They will say like, his went to the store, you know, they'll mix their pronouns up. So I do know that pronouns are taught to young kids, and that one thing that SOGI tries to reinforce in general, that SOGI 123 tries to reinforce, is that everybody gets to decide how they will be referred to, you know. And so if I say my name is Scout, then the respectful thing to do is to call me Scout. And it's the same if, you know, if I say that I'm a boy and I want you to say he and him, then the respectful thing to do is to follow that. So I think generally, if we're talking about pronouns, it's at that pretty basic level that pronouns are being taught in primary schools, you know, regardless of sort of gender identity parts of pronouns. And that one part of what SOGI 123 encourages is that however a kid says is their identity and how they want to be called, that we will respect that.
Susan, I know that you also worked in primary grades, and it's been a while, so I'm not sure if this is relevant or part of your experience.
About the pronouns, you know what it made me think of, which is that we did a lot of talking about pronouns, and partly because in Vancouver for my entire career, we were over 50% non-white and many people from different ethnic origins, and a lot of Chinese children. And for a while, I was also a learning assistance teacher. And one of the things I was trying to do was, I've tried to learn Mandarin unsuccessfully, but it doesn't have pronouns. So that is why the Chinese children in the school, and even Chinese adults that were born there, mix up he and she, because they never used it before in their language. And I didn't know that till I went and taught in China for a while. But so large part of the thing is just saying he and she, because if you've taught a Chinese child, you may have found like that was born in China, you might have found they mix them up. And I have a close friend who's been here in Canada for 40 years and she still mixes up he and she, you know. So anyway, pronouns are alive and kicking in even primary classes for sure.
Thanks very much. Okay, we have a comment from Jen Hoyle. I'm pretty good at contacting the awesome staff at my teen's school and connecting that way, but I'm curious if there are obvious places and people who are safe places for them to connect directly. And I think that's sort of what Mark was getting at in terms of there being stickers on the door and, you know, in school-wide assemblies for sort of pointing out who those SOGI leads are and acknowledging that those are people for them to connect with. Did you have more to add to that, Mark, or no? Okay. We also have a thank you to Scout. I think that was for a previous answer. Kelly asks, will SOGI be organizing any events for youth during Pride Month? On the coast, it seems many of the events and picnics are very adult oriented. Yes, so this year we have sort of put that to the schools to organize events at the school level just because of COVID and the, you know, the limited contact and cohorts. This seemed to be the way to go this year. So the schools are all raising their pride flags this week and different schools are organizing different events for the youth. I think that, you know, pre-COVID, we had planned to do a district-wide Pride event for youth. And we were also planning to have a presence during Pride and Sunday in the Park with Pride. So hopefully next year we'll be able to do some of those things. Another comment, awesome, thanks. That's nice. Another question for Chatleach. What SAGA meetings with SAGA meetings during lunch breaks, is that working this year with different lunch breaks in school?
Yeah, and I can jump in. It did pose a problem in terms of collectively having everyone together, but there has been some consistency in keeping them going on Fridays. So we have during the 9, 11, and 12 lunch hour, they meet, and at the grade 8 to 10 lunch hour, they meet. But what's been really nice, being the sort of the fluidity of the meetings and seeing the kids, is that the meetings don't seem to be happening particular in a space. It's happening all over the school, whether it's outside, sitting in the grass, whether it's in the library, whether it's the kids just running by me, talking. I can see collectively those group of kids that would traditionally be sitting in a classroom with a teacher facilitating SAGA conversations. And those seem to be just happening organically in the hallways. And that's kind of, to me, the thing that's really exciting when that starts to happen. So hopefully next year we'll have just the one lunch hour where groups can meet together and we don't have to worry about splitting kids up based on their grade.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. We have another comment that says, when my child first started going to the LGBTQ meetings, they told me it was for the free food. LOL, turns out they're gay. Thanks, that's great.
Vanessa, I
Yes.
don't know if you have time for me to tell my little story about the elementary thing.
I would love for you to tell that story. It's such a lovely story.
I have to try and tell it without crying. I retired some years ago, but after sort of running the kind of LGBT presence in my elementary school. And I retired, and a few years later, my school, it was one of those old red brick buildings, and it turned 100 years old. And so they had a get together after school. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go. All the kids will have, you know, that I worked with will have graduated. But I went anyway, and I no sooner got there than a group of about 10 or 11 young people, maybe 18 or 19, came up to me. And I recognized most of them as kids I had taught in the school. But one of them, a man, came up to me and he said, "Oh, Miss Harmon, I was worried you weren't going to come. There's something I really wanted to tell you." And I was trying madly to look at his name tag because I didn't recognize him. And so he said, I transitioned while I was at Kitts. My school was a feeder school for Kitsilano Secondary. And so I was taken by surprise. So I kind of said, "Oh, how did that go for you?" And he said, "Well, it was a bit rocky with the staff." Remember, this is years ago now. But he said, "You know what stopped me from killing myself? It was these guys." And they were all people. And I said, "Oh, that's nice." I'm being very sort of milquetoast because I didn't know how to respond. And he said, "No, Miss Harmon, you don't understand. when we were all in grade 6 and 7, you taught us that it was okay to be gay or trans. And so they all helped me through my transition. And I'm like, oh my goodness. That's just so amazing. And it's an argument I have for why we do this kind of stuff in elementary school. Not to mention the fact that kids who are trans or gay and lesbian usually know by the time they graduate from grade 7. And I always had a picture of them sitting in the classrooms really unhappy and feeling like there was something wrong with them. And that's why I believe it needs to be taught through the elementary years as well. End of story.
Thank you so much, Susan. That's such a beautiful way to end our evening tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. Parents, please let us know if there's specific topics you'd like more webinars or conversations about. We're happy to put together a series for next year. Thank you, Kate, for helping to manage all the tech for us. Thank you, Scout and Susan, for joining us from Vancouver and Environs tonight. And thanks, Mark, for being on hand for questions. It's been such a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.